Hey, what is up, mortals? It is Robo Celestial here with a new video for you. Welcome to What If Deku Could Use Haki. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. Everything stood silent. As the tension kept rising in the air, Izuku just stared his opponent down without any remorse. As he spoke, well, what's it going to be? He said, as narrowed his eyes. Shinso was completely stiff. He just couldn't move. Whenever he looked anywhere near Izuku, he felt himself being choked. It was as if Izuku's aura had wrapped itself around him. The purple-haired boy kept staring at the slowly approaching Izuku, until he felt another burning slap across his other cheek. I'm still waiting for an answer here, the green-haired boy annoyingly said, before he proceeded to shove his opponent back. Shinso lost his footing and landed on his back. Still frightened by the mere presence of Izuku, the green-haired boy just looked more annoyed, to the point of being angry. His opponent looked just about ready to give up. And that just angered him. I don't understand people like you. You expect that everything should just be handed to you on a silver platter, that you don't need to work hard and earn it, Izuku said, almost on the verge of bellowing. Shinso didn't know how to react, for the green-haired boy suddenly began to lecture him. You're the one to blame for not being in the hero course. I, a quirkless person, made it here because I worked hard enough. It's not just me either. Everyone in the hero course worked themselves to death just to get to this point. So why shouldn't you do the same? Izuku then said, keeping his annoyed look. Shinso just had his entire world flipped upside down. What the green-haired boy said was true. He didn't earn it. Everyone in the hero course had worked hard to earn their place. And the quirkless boy before him only stood as a manifestation of that hard work. Shinso then clenched his fist as he stood up on his trembling legs. You're right. Now let me answer your question. I will fight, and I intend to win, the purple-haired boy then shouted. As he raised his fists, Izuku only smiled upon hearing this, remembering to not answer any of Shinso's questions. The crowd began to roar in excitement, for the fight seemed to begin for real now. Shinso stared at his green-haired adversary down, waiting for the right moment. Both teens were just still, until one acted. Shinso began charging, determined to hit Izuku in the face. The green-haired boy didn't even flinch, as he responded by throwing a punch of his own. His fist was covered with haki. As it crashed straight into Shinso's face, the purple-haired boy didn't even get to lay a single finger on his opponent before he fell to the ground and lost consciousness. The whole arena went silent until midnight announced, Shinso is unable to continue. Midoriya advances to the second round. Before the audience began to cheer. It was an uneventful match, but it was still cool that it was finished with just one punch. Izuku looked at the unconscious Shinso in front of him and smiled. The purple-haired boy had been misguided up until now, but he could still become a great hero. Work hard, get stronger, then come and face me again, Izuku muttered, hoping that Shinso would somehow hear those words even when unconscious. The other matches went on in one way or another. Todoroki ended his match instantly by freezing the entire stadium, looking more angry than ever before. Uraraka tried her hardest against Katsuki, but still ended up losing. Now it was time for the second round, and Izuku was facing Todoroki immediately in the first match. The green-haired boy walked through the halls, slowly making his way down to the arena. He was undisturbed until he sensed someone around the corner with his observation haki. Izuku readied himself, thinking it was some sort of threat, but calmed himself a little when he saw who it was. From around the corner came a figure that was clad in fire, wearing a passive-aggressive expression. It was the number 2 hero. Endeavor, you're Midoriya, right? He asked, voice sounding just as passive-aggressive as his expression. Izuku was a little thrown off by this, but he didn't let it show as he answered, yeah, with a calm voice. The flame hero didn't change his expression as he continued to speak. You're pretty good, even though you're quirkless. Your next match is against my son. Make him use his flames. Izuku got a little annoyed to hear this. Endeavor wasn't asking him anything. He was ordering him around. Shoto was made to surpass all might, but he's being rebellious. He's rejecting the power that I gave him, and it's time for him to be taught a lesson, the flame hero then said, as he was flaring up slightly. Izuku was now angry. Not only did Endeavor order him around, but he also had the guts to treat his own son so poorly. Izuku tried to contain his anger as he walked past the flame hero. You're so pathetic, he then said, while his back was turned against Endeavor. The flame hero was angered upon hearing this, as he said, what did you say? You brat. Izuku was still unfazed by this. As he spoke, Todoroki is not you, and he's not an object that you can force your agendas onto, he said coldly. Before he turned to face Endeavor once more, I already told him that he wouldn't win without using his flames, so know that if he does use them you'll have no part in it. That alone will show just how much of a failure you are, he then said, before walking away towards the fighting ground. Endeavor was furious upon hearing this. So much that he possibly could burn the entire stadium to the ground. The flame hero was so angry that he readied himself to attack Izuku from behind. But he stopped himself. It wasn't because he had calmed down, or decided that it wasn't worth it. It was something else. The flame hero was frozen, feeling this overwhelming aura encompass and shake his very core. He almost didn't want to believe that this aura had come from Izuku, because its sheer power reminded him of someone else. How are you almost as strong as All Might? He muttered, as he watched the green-haired boy calmly walk away. Izuku then made it to the fighting ground, where Todoroki was patiently waiting for him. The two teens stared each other down, each with a cold glare. This is what they've both been waiting for. To finally settle things. Begin, Midnight shouted, and so they did. Todoroki began by firing an ice attack at Izuku. The green-haired boy responded by breaking the ice with a Haki-infused punch. Then came another ice attack, only to meet the same fate. This exchange continued for a while, always showing the same result. Rayleigh observed the match from afar, wearing a skeptical look. It looks like they're evenly matched, a deflated All Might then said. Rayleigh didn't break his expression. As he said, they're both holding back. That Todoroki kid isn't using both sides of his quirk, and Izuku isn't using the full extent of his Haki. But why is that? All Might looked slightly shocked upon hearing this, until he realized that it was true. Todoroki wasn't using his flames for some reason, and Izuku is said to be capable of a lot more than just this. Rayleigh kept thinking and thinking, wondering what his student was trying to do. He inspected both competitors multiple times, until he finally found a flaw to Todoroki's approach. It was at that point that Rayleigh realized what Izuku was doing, and he smiled. I see, he's tiring him out, the silver-haired geezer then said, sounding excited. All Might looked at him in confusion, as he asked, what do you mean? Rayleigh turned his head towards his blonde companion. As he began to explain, Izuku entered the ring with a plan. He found Todoroki's weakness, which is that he gets frostbite by using his ice too much. Izuku is stalling the match until his opponent can't continue, because he knows that his defense and endurance is superior to his opponent's. All Might was shocked upon hearing this, for he hadn't even realized it yet. This only proves one thing. Izuku is a competent fighter that always seems to be in control of the situation. Well, he might be after something else, Rayleigh then said, as he turned his gaze back to the match. All Might was once again confused, for what could Izuku possibly be after besides victory? The teens continued their long exchange of ice and destruction, until it slowly stopped. Todoroki was reaching his limits, for he was already trembling from the cold. Izuku just stared him down with a cold glare, as he asked, well, brain freeze, will you use your flames already, or are you just going to forfeit? Todoroki looked annoyed upon hearing this, as he bellowed, did my father talk you into this? Anger being clear in his voice. Izuku was still unfazed, as he answered, he tried to order me, but I just told him to shove it. I'm here on my own accord, to tell you that you're an idiot. What's the point of holding back if it makes you lose? With a cold voice, Todoroki was even angrier now, as he roared, what about you? Aren't you holding back as well? In pure anger, Izuku was as calm as ever, as he answered, yes, why would I burn the forest when hunting a rabbit? This sentence shook Todoroki. What Izuku meant was that he could easily end this match whenever he wanted, but he chose to hold back and do this. The bicolored teen was more angry than ever before, as he shot another ice barrage at Izuku. You won't make this easy. How typical, the green-haired boy said, before he jumped to avoid the attack. He then advanced upon Todoroki, and the bicolored teen was too frozen to avoid in time. Izuku closed the gap between himself and Todoroki, before he delivered a Haki-infused punch to his gut. The ice user was thrown back, before he crashed and slid across the ground. Wake up, Todoroki, it's your damned quirk, not his. Use it to become the hero that you want to be, not the weapon that he wants. Izuku then shouted, getting so livid that weaker waves and pulses of his spirit shot out from him. Todoroki didn't know how to react to this, for Izuku's words had brought back memories. He remembered all the things his mother used to say to him, things that he thought he had forgotten. It was at that moment that the bicolored teen realized something. Izuku was right, it's his quirk, and he's not going to let his father decide his destiny. As that last thought entered the teen's mind, steam was emitted from his left side. It grew more and more intense, until a wild burst of flame formed itself. The ice that had formed itself on his body melted. As he shouted, "This is my power, and I'll use it to become my own type of hero." With a smile on his face, Rayleigh smiled even more upon witnessing this advancement, for his hunch had been correct. This is what Izuku was after. That is why he was smiling right now. The green-haired boy smiled broadly. As his opponent spoke up, "Let's finish this, Midoriya," and was answered by Izuku raising his fists and roaring back, "With pleasure, Todoroki." The two teens then readied their attacks. Izuku covered both his arms and legs with Haki before charging into battle with observation into high gear. Meanwhile, Todoroki was firing an abundance of ice while also shooting his flames. The two then clashed. Not holding back any longer, Izuku kept charging towards his opponent, but was quickly engulfed by the flames. He kept pushing, and so did his bi-colored opponent, until the ring was engulfed by a massive explosion. That was then followed by a powerful wave. Few knew what this wave was, but soon a few spectators began to pass out, then it slowly disappeared. The dust cleared ever so slowly, only to reveal one single man standing. It was Izuku, and he barely had a single scratch on him. Everyone was frozen with shock, even more so when they saw that Todoroki was unconscious and buried into the wall. "Todoroki is out of bounds. Midoriya advances to the third round," Midnight then announced. And the crowds began to cheer and roar. Rayleigh knew what happened. Izuku had used Conqueror's Haki at a level that was near its full strength. But it must have been a subconscious activation during the final clash. This, however, didn't make things any better, and so the silver-haired geezer was more angry than happy with his student. Endeavor was also watching the match, from beginning to end. He wanted to roar when his son had used his flames, but he couldn't. Izuku's words were still ringing in the back of his head, and that was more than enough to stop him from doing what he wanted to do at that moment. Todoroki then woke up, only to find himself in the infirmary. He felt exhausted, both cold and burned, but he didn't get to think too much of it before someone spoke up. "Wakey wakey. Brain freeze." Todoroki was immediately brought to attention. As he turned his head towards the person speaking, what he saw was his previous opponent, Izuku Midoriya. "Sleep well?" Izuku asked, as he was smiling. Todoroki looked as calm as ever. As he asked, "What are you doing here?" Izuku just smiled even more, as he answered, "Just checking on you." "That was a pretty big blast, you know." Todoroki looked a little amused as he heard this. Before he answered, "I know, and I should be congratulating you for your victory." Izuku kept holding his smile, as he simply answered, "You don't have to. Save it for when I win the festival instead." Before laughing a little, Todoroki smiled. Before he laughed along, the atmosphere was warm between the boys, as they were friendly and laughed together. Izuku then stopped laughing, before he spoke once more. "That was a good match. We should do it again sometime," he said, before he extended his fist towards Todoroki. The ice user looked at it in shock, as if it was some sort of alien from another planet, but he then gathered himself, before he gave Izuku a fist bump while saying, "Yeah, definitely." With a gentle smile of his own, Izuku only giggled a little, before he began walking towards the door. He then stopped just short of the door, before he turned to Todoroki and said, "I thought you'd like to know. Almost our entire class was here earlier to check on you when you were asleep." With a calm voice, Todoroki was shocked to hear this. He didn't expect anyone to be there, but apparently his entire class had been there to see him. The ice user smiled over the fact that his classmates had cared about him. As he nodded towards Izuku, the green-haired boy nodded back, and was about to walk through the infirmary door when Todoroki spoke again. "Hey, Midoriya," the ice user called out, and Izuku turned his gaze towards him. "I still don't believe that you're quirkless," Todoroki then said, voice being as calm as before. Izuku was a little shocked to hear this, although he shouldn't have been. The green-haired boy hasn't done anything to prove that he is quirkless, and the events in the match didn't help his case. However, Izuku just shrugged it off, as he smiled while saying, "You may believe what you want, brain freeze. It doesn't change anything." With a calm voice, Todoroki was taken aback by this. He didn't expect this answer, but he quickly realized that it was true. Maybe Izuku has a quirk. Maybe he doesn't. Either way, it doesn't matter. He can still do the things that he does, stand up to powerful quirks. It doesn't matter if it's a quirk that makes him this powerful. Todoroki then smiled at his green-haired friend, before he nodded. Izuku smiled back, before he left the infirmary. He then began to walk through the hallways, somewhat joyful. He was happy that Todoroki finally had been free of his shackles, and he wanted to fight him again someday. Izuku kept walking through the hall, until he suddenly stopped. He could feel something with his observation Haki. That someone was watching him. He then used it to look closer, until he recognized who it was. Izuku's mood had suddenly been ruined. As he muttered, "You watch me from a distance and listen in on my conversations, but you're too scared to confront me," to himself, clearly irritated. Before he continued his walk, the observer realized that he had somehow been found out. He didn't know why he decided to stalk Izuku, but he couldn't shake that feeling every time he looked at him. He just started to tremble, and he didn't know why. Izuku's aura was so intense, and it was so powerful. How is he quirkless? Is he even human? The observer covered his face with one of his hands as he, with a trembling voice, muttered, "What the hell are you, Deku?"